Hello everyone and welcome once again to Shifting Tides. We've often heard a saying by Hippocrates, the Greek physician, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. Today, I'm honored to invite a dear friend of mine, Cyntha Gonzalez, a raw foodist, but she started her journey way back when she used food as her main tool to evolve, to get into a space of complete alignment in the mental, physical, emotional, and psychological body. Cyntha Gonzalez is a transpersonal counselor of Mexican origin living in Dubai. So welcome, Cyntha Gonzalez. Hello, Cyntha, and very, very, very big welcome to Shifting Tides.
Thank you, Mahima. My honor to be here, truly.
So glad. I have known you for nearly 2 decades, and I have seen you at every step of the way. I've seen you upgrading yourself. And with every situation you've had in your life, you have only come out as a better version of yourself. So, and I know food played a very big role in that. So food clearly, as I see it, has been the reason or the tool for your spiritual awakening. So can you just briefly tell as to where it all started and what was the trigger? What was the trigger?
Thank you. Thank you. This is very exciting because in reflecting on coming together here today with you, I realized that one of the markers in my journey you came into my life right at a very significant marker. So we'll get to that. I'll look forward to naming that. Yes. So, my journey, Mahima, has been one of light and shadows, or the darkness of food and the light of food. And when I say the darkness of food, I'm talking about the compulsive overeating, the comfort eating, the stress eating, the places where I had used food as a coping mechanism and to deal with certain difficult emotional situations or traumatic stories in my life. So that has been part of my journey. And then parallel to that, I also have had some huge awakenings around the relationship to food in my own life and the relationship that we as people in general can have. Let me just say that again. I've also had a real understanding of how spirituality can be integrated into our relationship with food. And that's been a big part of my life. And I have to say, from the early years, because I became a yoga student in my late teens, and I was always aware of these yogis in India, usually in the Himalayas, who were breatharians and not eating anything. And I was always deeply intrigued by this. And they were always this kind of benchmark and this vista, like here I am in the United States, growing up in the United States, and my whole relationship to food here. And then somewhere over in India are these yogis that don't eat at all. And they're totally vital and full of energy. And wow, what is that? So I have to say that some of the intrigue began by being a young student of yoga and just aware of certain adepts. So it started there. But as a teenager, I had a few challenging experiences like most teenagers have in whatever manner. And the way that I found, and also I have to name that, certain countries tend to have a certain kind of affliction or a certain way of coping with the stresses that they have. Yeah. So for example, there's some countries that are known for being heavy drinkers, that drink and alcohol has been their way of coping with their stresses. Some, definitely the United States, I would say food has been one of ours. And we're a country of immigrants. We're a country where a lot of people came from very challenging economic conditions. Maybe they were even starving. And so they came to the United States where there was the promise of a new life, the new world, abundance. And so I believe some of that acting out with food is related to this scarcity consciousness that some Americans and some of the ancestors of the early settlers in the United States have brought with them to the land of the United States. So just want to name that is something that was not only for me personally, but I know it was definitely in my community, the whole food situation. And it continues to be a very strong issue that needs attention.
Like a crutch. It's like an emotional crutch. They use food as
It is. So I was in that, and I hit my rock bottom when I was a student in psychology, studying to become a counselor. And I hit a moment of deep incongruence where I felt like I was a fraud, that how could I be counseling people where secretively I was acting out with food, I was comfort eating, I was binge eating. And that dissonance became intolerable. And right around that time, I ended up moving to Paris, France. And when I was in Paris with the beautiful environment of women and more in their femininity and their sensuality, it was such a trigger that dissonance got even louder. It was no longer just about my integrity. It was about the reality that this is another way of being a woman, and the whole society operates this way. And that's when I hit my rock bottom around food. And that was in 1989. And that's when I went to my first Overeaters Anonymous meeting, what we call OA meetings. It's a 12-step program. And it deals with compulsive overeating and other food issues where we use food as a crutch. And during that time when I was in OA, the best slogan that I gathered from all the tools I learned from there was, put down the food and feel the feelings. Put down the food and feel the feelings. And one of the aspects of the 12-step program is it's a spiritual program where you call on a higher power to work through you and with you to overcome this addiction. So you look more to this higher power than the food as your source of comfort and support. And things started to change, and I started seeing differences in my body. I wasn't like exceedingly overweight, but I knew I was eating for the wrong reasons. I knew that my body was not in balance and in harmony. And I started to feel a sense of progress and victory, like, oh my goodness, I'm finding something that's really working with this. So that was a really, really key moment. Then in 1993, I had a Moroccan boyfriend and in Paris, and his mother came to visit him. And she stayed with him the whole month of Ramadan. And I was amazed by her. She just, as the days went on, she became lighter and lighter and more at peace and serene. And there was just this fantastic energy coming off her. And I was just observing this on a regular basis every time I would visit her. And then at the end, she flew back to Morocco for the celebration called Eid, which is at the end to celebrate the finale of Ramadan. And I turned to my boyfriend at the time and I said, I want to go to Morocco next year and I want to experience Ramadan. And so, of course, both of us, because of our work schedules, we couldn't go the whole month of Ramadan, but we certainly were working remotely back then. But we went a year later, and that was in 1994, and stayed several days. And I just fell in love with this ritual. I was amazed at how a whole society was fasting in the different ways. Some people would sleep a little bit later, but it didn't matter. That a whole group of people were carried by that support they gave each other, and would fast from the moment the sun rose until the moment the sun set. And it's a version of intermittent fasting. And I started really appreciating the rigorousness of this spiritual practice. And then what happened was I went back to Paris and I continued observing Ramadan because I thought, okay, well, I've started, let's see the month through. And I'm sitting in my apartment. It was cold. It was early March. It was cold. And I had an hour left. I had an hour left before the sun would set and I could break my fast. And I sat there really cranky, really hungry, really cold. And I was in a deep meditation because there was nothing else to do. And as I was in that meditation, and just in this real irritability, this kind of knowing came over me and basically said, you have to eat God. You have to ingest God. If you're choosing to commit to this discipline and this practice right now, and for the next hour, you can't bring in food, what else are you going to bring in to navigate this?
Yeah.
And you need to bring in this spiritual essence. And that, of course, comes with breathing practices, deep states of meditation, where we go into alpha or theta states of consciousness, reading spiritual texts, just simply resting, but in that more contemplative way.
Yeah.
And that was a real breakthrough moment, because it's like something at that moment, I calibrated at a higher level. Something went whoop, and I moved up to another way of navigating and metabolizing the stress, whether it be the emotional stress or physical stress in my life. And that was a radical aha moment. A few days later, I was again fasting, and it was in the last hours before, and this time, it was a dark day. It was cold and rainy, and so it was already dark, but the sun hadn't set yet. And I was meditating I would always meditate the hour before breaking fast. And I was meditating. And as I was in this meditation, I kind of had another wave of a deep knowing. And this knowing basically kind of that rose up within me, said, you will fast the rest of your life.
Wow.
And I was like, why? Why will I fast the rest of my life? And then it was this just wave of just seeing everything. And mind you, this is 1994, and the Gulf War was 1991. And there had, in the interim between the Gulf War and 94, there had been quite a few terrorist attacks in Paris itself, as of course all the other occurrences around the world. And at that moment, I understood something as an American citizen, that I had a certain spiritual activist duty to meet Muslims across the world, because now Russia was no longer the arch enemy as it had been in the Cold War when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Now the Arab world was the opponent, the enemy of the United States. And I understood very deeply that as an American, I had a certain duty, a certain kind of responsibility at a spiritual level to deeply understand Muslims. To the best of my ability, I knew in the depth of my being that I was not called to convert to Islam, but I was called to engage in this very rigorous spiritual practice called Ramadan. And when I would connect to Muslims in the incredible admiration and awe and respect of them fasting an entire lunar month, 28 days or so, and what that demanded of people, and that humility that came with them. And a few years later, I ended up meeting, who is now my former husband, an Egyptian national who was living in England. And when we met, he was a bit surprised and pleasantly intrigued that I had already been observing Ramadan for a few years. And he is very multi-spiritual, I would say. He's very interspiritual in his approach. So he is an observing Muslim, but he's also someone that does yoga every day and goes to Buddhist retreats and is very inclusive of all the spiritual paths. And so in my time with him, we did observe Ramadan in a way that was just very beautiful and very light. And as I was doing that, I was becoming more and more aware of its value also in the world of intermittent fasting, that there's a real value to intermittent fasting.
So
Okay, I'm gonna stop there, yeah.
Yeah, one question that comes here while you're talking is, especially coming from a Mexican origin, where
Yes.
the food is absolutely yum. It is by far one of the best cuisines in the world. So you obviously had a very interesting food experience in your growing up years. Yeah. And then having studied what you studied, did this knowing about food playing a major role in your evolution or raising your consciousness come about from your education, or just your need to understand human body and emotions better?
That's a really good question. I would say, first of all, as a little girl, I was very spiritual. I was very attracted to the mystics and to the saints. That's what I would go read when when we had like reading time in the library when I was in elementary school. I would always be gravitated towards any books on saints. I was raised in Catholic education, so there were plenty of saint, biographies in the library. And I would just always go towards them. And I think what I was attracted to was how working with food, or like the processes of fasting or regulating food, is a way to reach higher states of consciousness, to reach those mystical states and commune with the divine.
Okay.
And then that's what led me to go raw. So in 2000,
To know, how did you go from intermittent fasting to being raw, just giving up cooking? It's a very big step. And also, as they say, that what takes the maximum difficulty in giving up is what is most fruitful and most fulfilling and rewarding. So obviously, where you are today is because of the rewards you've got out of following a journey in food all these years. So it'll be really nice to know, how did that shift happen?
Sure. So I didn't know anything about it. I never heard of raw veganism or anything. And at that point, I had gone more and more vegan for a whole host of reasons. It's just like my progress, my journey was just getting lighter and lighter. But so I was mostly vegan at that point. But in 2000, I went to Bali, and I was staying at an ashram, and I was there and with my former husband and my daughter. And there was this lovely American woman and named Liza at the time. And Liza was a raw foodist. She'd only been raw for a year at the time. And when I met her, I just saw this light coming off her face. And her eyes were so white and so alert. And then I saw it because it was communal dining. And I would notice that she was eating something very different than the rest of us. And I was like, what's happening? Why are you eating that? And she said, well, for this last year, I've been observing a raw vegan diet. And I said, tell me more. And so she did. And basically she explained to me that when you cook food over, it's basically like 112, 115 degrees Fahrenheit or 42, 43 degrees Celsius, that you kill off the enzymes and a lot of the vitamins in the food, and that the food loses its vital life force energy, and that vitality of the food is sacrificed with the cooking. And when you maintain food in its freshness, and even more so when you eat live food, which live food means it's been picked within 24 hours of eating it. So when you have either that raw food or that live food, what you're doing is bringing in incredible, like perky, high energy, life force energy into your food, into your body, into your being. And so the being, it's like putting the highest octane of petrol into your vehicle, is that your car will go at its highest speeds and be more responsive if it's got the best fuel. And so I was so intrigued. And of course, because I'd always been attracted to these more higher states of consciousness and saw this as a vehicle, but I was very aware, because of that Mexican food precisely, that I was not ready to do that. I was not ready to give up certain things. But the thing that blew me away was every morning we would do yoga with Liza, my former husband, my daughter was a little toddler, and all the other guests that were staying at the ashram, and some of the other, residents that lived there. We're all under this big gazebo, this thatched roof in the middle of hot, steamy tropics of Bali, doing yoga early. And it was hot. It was August, it was hot. And there was Liza, fresh as a flower, not a bead of sweat coming out, while the rest of us are these little sweaty piglets, sweating and dripping and like chugging the water in between yoga postures. Yeah. Just like bare, like little wet rags. And there she was, dry as could be, fresh. And I would just look at her like, how are you doing that? how are you? And I knew, it's like, oh my goodness me, she doesn't have the same toxins. She's moving her body through with a different, she's on a different source of nourishment than we are. Yeah. And I was amazed. And she never left my mind. Left Bali, returned to my home. At that point, I was now living in Dubai. And she just never left my consciousness. And so it always played on me. And this continued until early 2003. So we're now almost 3 years later. And I'm in a program called The Art of Living, which is a program, a meditation, breathing program designed by Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, which you must know of. And so I attended, at that time, it was a 6-day retreat for the beginner's course. And it was 5 evenings, and the last day was a full day. And we were asked to eat just fresh fruits and vegetables. If we were going to eat anything cooked, just some lightly steamed courgette or something very light, no starch, no bananas, no wheat, no alcohol, no fizzy drinks. I mean, just keep it very, very light. Now, retrospectively, it was a raw way of eating, but I didn't call it that. It was just, I'm just gonna have some fruits in the morning and have a salad. And then we were asked to quit eating at 4 p.m. because we began in the evening. So for 5 evenings in a row, I did this. And then on the 6th day, we came all day, and we were going to fast that day, and we were going to have an entire day of doing the practices, which included yoga and this kriya of breathing and deep meditation. And at the end of the 6th day, we were also going to have a potluck. And so we'd all brought food that morning and tucked it into the kitchen of the venue. And we all knew, oh my goodness, all this amazing Indian food is going to be waiting for us at the end, which of course we've been all on this very light diet all week long. And at the very end of the actual workshop, Rugmani, this lovely, lovely, lovely Art of Living teacher who's so dear to me, Rugmani asked everybody to go around and to share what did they get out of the week together. And when it came my turn, I looked at everybody and I said, I feel amazing. I feel the best I've ever felt in my entire life. This level of yoga, this light eating, this meditation, I feel so light, so sharp in my mind. My body is so limber and just flexible. I want this to continue. I want to feel this good all the time. But I know I'm going to indulge in some curries and some papadum and some lovely other foods over in that kitchen because I just love that pleasure of that taste. And then I'm going to bring this down, and I'm asking myself, why wouldn't I want to feel this good all the time? Yeah. Why wouldn't I want to maintain what I've been doing these last 6 days? And I know I'm not going to. And I said, this is perplexing me deeply. And I said to everybody, I think the problem is it's not just emotional self-confidence, it's spiritual self-confidence. The light, being this light, somehow is too overwhelming, too threatening to me. And somehow I must not believe that I am of this light, and I need to dim myself back down. Wow. And I need to bring myself back down and not stay at that level, that something is not in balance here. And I'm not satisfied by that, but I know who I am and I know my limitations for today. So sure enough, I indulged in all the goodies that we had afterwards, and I felt not so great. And I woke up a bit hungover. It's when I really learned about food hangovers. Yeah. So that was early of 2003. Lo and behold, when the student's ready, the teacher comes. That's right. The next month, Shazzy from Cambridge, England, came to the UK to offer a workshop, an entire day on raw food eating at a beautiful 5-star hotel. And it was, the whole day event was mixed with these lovely raw juices and some raw snacks and a beautiful raw lunch. And in between, she would lecture on the benefits of, and the science. She was extremely adept on explaining the science of raw food eating. So I went with a very dear friend of mine and my former husband and a friend of his, and I'm sitting in this seminar. And as I'm sitting in this seminar, I was nodding to every single thing she said, like, yep, I get that. Yep. I understand that to be true. Yes, I know that's true. And I'm sitting there and I'm starting to like sink deeper and deeper in my chair and feeling very, very vulnerable. And at one point in the afternoon, I just had this kind of spiritual moment where I just felt the finger of God beckon me and say, Cyntha, the time is now. It's enough time of preparation. It's time for you to take this new
That was
jump.
your big aha moment.
It was one of the biggest ones I've had in my life. And so I came home, I flung myself on my bed and I cried. And I cried because I was scared. I was scared that I would never be invited to dinner parties again. I was scared.
Ask you, because you obviously are in a minority. The whole world eats cooked food. And for you to be able to taking such a big step in your life, you almost feel you're going to be a thumb
ostracized.
I mean, in the sense you're not belonging anywhere. How would you socialize? How would you meet your friends? I mean, the common thing we tell our friends is, let's meet over coffee, or let's meet, what happens to all that? So that was my next question. Yeah, go on.
Yes. I had a buddy. It's like, when you go to the gym and you've got your gym buddy or your workout buddy. I had my raw buddy. And so we would share recipes and we would, make food for each other. And that helped me so much. It was like I had some hand holding those first several months. And then when she realized that path was a bit too much for her lifestyle, and because she had young kids and she wasn't ready to do it in the same way that I was. It was okay. I'd been taken over to the other side. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that all my friends, the majority of them, as you included, when I've come to visit you in India, you have been so incredibly accommodating. And a lot of friends, they take delight in going on the internet and discovering some raw recipes and making things. And always I tell them, if you have a lettuce leaf, I'll be happy. Just give me a salad and I'll be fine. So that has actually been very little of a problem. And I have, and in fact, I find great joy in hosting meals and dinners and lunches for not only my friends, but also the courses that I teach, and really introduce people to the array of recipes you can do. And the food.
Look at you. I have had a 3-course meal, raw 3-course meal with you. It's phenomenal. The number, because usually people would take raw food as a bowl of salad. That's about it. And it ends there. But to know that you can actually create an appetizer, a main course, a dessert is amazing.
Yes. And the key is blending and marinating. Soaking, so you soak nuts, for example, and you can blend things, and then you can also marinate things, and then it changes things. You can make the most amazing soups. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, and I'm happy for any of your viewers, I'm happy to share with them I have a little raw ebook, so we can get that out to people and give them a link to access that.
Yes.
So yeah, that would be fun to share that with everyone. But it's been such a beautiful journey. So the day after I went raw, I was sitting at the traffic lights, and there were some trees at the intersection. And as I'm waiting for the light to turn to green, I feel these trees. I can literally just feel they're with me, and I could feel their life force energy coming off. And in that moment, I just burst into tears, and I understood something very deeply. And these moments, when you have them, you can't pre-script them, you can't force them. They're grace. When you get these moments where you have radical ahas or downloads or spiritual, mystical, awarenesses, it's grace. And there's just, all you can do is ride the wave of when they come. And it was one of those moments. And in that moment, I had this deep, deep understanding that I could not have been raw a day earlier, that I needed to be ready to let go of all the emotional, nostalgic attachments I had to Mexican food, given my father's whole heritage, and all my relatives I'm very close to there. I needed to also get to a place where I was mothering myself, parenting myself sufficiently to no longer use food as a substitute parent or a substitute nurturer.
Yeah.
And that my capacity to love myself and take care of myself was stronger than the need to use food in a certain way to do that. And in that moment, I had just the biggest, because on one level, I was like, oh my God, why didn't I start this earlier? I feel so good. I feel lighter. My mind is faster. My memory is sharper. I just feel a certain mobility in my body. I have so much energy. I want to, why didn't I start this earlier in my life? I'm 41. Why did I wait? And then it was because emotionally, you could not have done it till the day you did it. You needed to heal and grow and individuate and reparent your inner child sufficiently enough to then let go of the food as that substitute caretaker parent. So that was a really key moment. And then, so I continued observing Ramadan, and my Ramadan experience mixed with the raw, it just took things to another level. I just felt even lighter. So then in 2006, so at that point it'd been, it was my third year of fasting. I'm sorry, my third year of being raw. And I was kind of bored. And I was like, when it came time to break fast during Ramadan, I didn't want to break fast. I was like, I don't need to break fast. Let's keep going. I feel so light. And then I said, okay, now you're in the territory of something what they call pranic nourishment or breatharianism. And I had read a book by the lovely Jess Moheen about that. And I said to myself, when I first learned about her, nobody had websites. But I wonder now, here we are in 2006, I wonder if she has a website. And sure enough, I go on her website looking for some instruction and some guidance on pranic nourishment. And lo and behold, I discover that she offers dark room pranic nourishment retreats for approximately 13 days at the time. And I was overjoyed. I signed up, flew to Chiang Mai the next February, Thailand, and threw myself in full on. And basically the option was to just drink water and to be in this dark room. And it was 13 days, or you could take a juice. And I decided to go the full version because I thought I really wanted to have this experience. It was life-changing. It was absolutely life-changing. And in there, I had some major ahas. One of them was that every time I would have a difficult emotion, I would want to go to food. I would get hungry. I would want to eat. And because there was no food to be eaten, I had to metabolize that emotion differently. And at that time, I was going through the divorce with my now former husband. And there were a couple pieces that I needed to work with around forgiveness to really be fully coherent in my leaving that marriage, to really be complete and bring proper closure in the way that I knew I needed to do emotionally. And in that dark room, nothing was spared. And there were two major events for me where I really hit a rock bottom. And really the only thing left to do was to forgive. And not just forgive him for whatever it was that I needed to forgive him for, but to forgive myself for entering into a certain dynamic, for being complicit in a certain dynamic. And that, it was dark, it wasn't easy, and when you're in a dark room and you're not eating and just on food and you're nourishing yourself otherwise, you're also in this kind of recreation of a womb experience. And inevitably you will enter into some kind of rebirth on the other side.
Yeah. What I wanted to, because you brought out the fact that in the dark room, you were also going through ending your marriage. That was the
Yes.
time when you were processing the whole journey of going the separate way. Do you think that your journey with the food and where you were at that point in time helped you navigate the divorce better?
Absolutely.
If you were not that you would probably, it would have been more hurting or more painful, or was it still that way?
It's a very interesting question. I think it's kind of both. On one level, what I feel very, very deeply is that the time I went raw in 2003 was the knowing that I was probably going to be leaving my marriage. And then in 2007, we finally got legally divorced. So for me, the going raw was a shift in my own consciousness. I upgraded. And then anything that was incongruent with the truth of who I am and with where I was at in my life had to slip away. So it meant the marriage had to go, because the marriage was not at the same, it just was not in the flow that I was at in my own spiritual development. I had moved on. I had moved on from that. And so these, whatever is that structure or that person in our life, if it's we're no longer in resonance with it, it will drop away. And so both were going on. That left as I was moving into another way of existing and being. And then because I was in that existence and receiving that support to operate at a higher vibration, it then allowed me to navigate some very dark territory and like in most cases, divorce isn't pretty. There's a huge amount of grief. There can be conflict, there can be misunderstandings, and the need and resentments. And then that catapulted me into the deepest experiential understanding of radical forgiveness. I always understood forgiveness. Yeah. Please, do you want to ask me something?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment here. I think you've touched upon two very, very key points, which would help so many of our viewers. Because I think, even taking example from my own life, you're aware of that I walked out of my marriage in perfect harmony because I had this knowing one morning that this is not serving my bigger purpose. Where I'm heading, this is only going to be an impediment. So I had to move on and separate, however hurtful it was. I have to separate because I owe my own evolution to myself. And I think this is a very key point for our viewers to understand, that when all of us have a knowing, all of us get to a point where our inner voice tells us what our journey is going to look like or where are we heading. And if we don't take a step and drop an attachment, however hurtful it is, we will not grow. Yes. It gives me hackers while I say this, because this, I think, is the biggest learning for women, especially because women usually keep everything so suppressed because the other's benefit is more to her than her own benefit. And she sacrifices. So how wonderful, Cyntha, for you to share this, because this is what I would really like each of our viewers to resonate with and to really think it through.
When you're saying this, what you're reminding me of is one of the activities that I do in my work is I officiate marriages. And I officiate more conscious marriages, people that want to marry and in a very conscious spiritual union, and where they bring in the emotional intelligence of what they're really doing and taking vows of commitment to each other, whether they're legally married or just a relationship commitment ceremony without the legality of it. And we talk very much about the apex of the triangle, that here is myself, here is my partner, and here are my spiritual practices, and here are his or her spiritual practices. And here we meet at the ego level. And it's my responsibility. And here's God consciousness or the divine consciousness at the tip of the triangle. And there's only one tip. There's only one God consciousness or divine consciousness. And it's my responsibility to do my spiritual practices. And it's his or her responsibility to do their spiritual practices. And it's important to really commit. That's one of the vows that when I work with certain couples that they often take is, I commit to honoring your highest spiritual truth. So if your spiritual truth says that you need to leave me, you need to move on, I'm going to do my very best to commit to respecting that, as much as my ego down here is going to freak out and go into all kinds of spasms of abandonment and rejection and fear and terror and panic. And I may ride those waves, but I will come back to doing my spiritual practices and honoring you're doing yours. And if your spiritual practice says that this is your highest truth, I have to respect that.
Exactly. Wonderful. And also, Cyntha, over the years, you have also invented beautiful workshops and retreats, and you're touching so many, many lives. And I know that you had started doing a lot of work in very vulnerable areas, which are the war zones and the conflict zones. And you helped people in many countries, not just Palestine and Israel, even in India, even in Ireland, where you've helped people deal with trauma, deep, deep trauma. So could you share as to where is
Yes.
that insight coming from, and how did you go about it, and also some really heart-wrenching experience you've had?
So, first of all, I want to say that when I left my marriage, I understood one of the greatest spiritual lessons I could have learned in this lifetime thus far, which is to fully take responsibility, to not just forgive, the circumstances of my divorce or my former husband, but to not just forgive myself as well, but to truly take responsibility that it was the perfect spiritual curriculum for both of us. That at least for myself, I will only speak for myself, that it was exactly what I needed and that I attracted every bit of it. And it was exactly what I needed for my highest growth and my highest learning. But back to the radical forgiveness, what I learned is that our emotional traumas are not just our own personal ones, they're also the collective traumas. In 2017 and 2018, I did a year-long training with Thomas Hubel called the Pocket Project. And it was training and how to work and heal collective trauma. So the awareness is that when you get groups of people or entire nations, the collective traumas that they may have, and that we have to take that into consideration, thanks to what we know now in science with epigenetics and how trauma can be passed down through the genes from generation to generation. And so the awareness of that, the awareness of one's personal trauma, and also the necessity of working with the other parallel therapies beyond counseling and psychotherapy, but also, and coaching, but things like the emotional body work, working with the body, altered or non-ordinary states of consciousness, expanded states of consciousness. So I'm also a holotropic breathwork facilitator. Retreats. I also lead vision quests where we go into the desert. We fast on water for usually 2 to 3 days. And we dive in and we're one with the elements. We're one with the earth. We're in nature, pure nature. And we are in silence. And so and always forgiveness comes as part of the package. So whether I'm working in India, Ireland, Israel, the West Bank of Palestine, wherever I am, it always seems to come to the path of forgiveness, that is a key ingredient. My work is, I believe that we're very much in this, we all know this, we're in very significant times. All the different wisdom traditions affirm this, confirm this. We're in this radical shift as a humanity. And so I believe so many of us, like yourself, are called to participate and to support humanity in this significant transition. And so I come back to the power of radical forgiveness and the power of how our emotions are in our body and the power of being mindful of all the little escape hatches that we can have to avoid being in the now, avoid being with our feelings. And that includes metabolizing the traumas that we've gone through. And we are so blessed with an abundance of modalities on our planet today. So many, the list is endless. Yeah. Of things, of tools we can use. And what's so beautiful is whatever our personality is, we will find the modality that best suits us. Absolutely. And these modalities are here to escort us into a radical leap of consciousness that we're ushering in right now.
Yeah. Well, you started this work of taking human consciousness to the next level through your workshops, through your work, and even being a raw foodist all these years. And now today, when the predominant emotion lurking around the world is fear and insecurity, when these are the emotions we are operating on, then what is the difference, one, you see when you started out and today? This is like a period of 2 decades or so. And the next point which I'd like to make is, how do you see yourself as a role model, or as a teacher, or as a mentor in this circumstances, or in this situation around the world?
Well, first of all, I would say that, so I'm in just a few days, I'm going to turn 59. I was blessed to be exposed to this work as a teenager. So it's actually been 40 years that I've been in this world. And then it was just beginning. And I remember when I moved, so I lived in South America for a period of time. And before I left for South America, the bookstore was like a little skinny section of self-development. When I came back 2 years later, there was an explosion. So now we're in the late 80s, an explosion. There was a whole wall of self-development books that were published at that time. And I remember coming back to the United States and just amazed at the local bookstore that I had gone to only 2 years prior, in this flourishing of consciousness on the bookshelves. Yes. And that to me was significant in itself. So it's just grown and grown and grown. So asking about my role in this as a role model, for me, first of all, it's a path. I knew early on that this was going to be my path. I knew very clearly at age 19 that this is what I would do, and be part of this and teach this work and work with people in this manner. It was very lucidly clear to me. But what I have learned over this time is that I've got to walk my talk. I have to do my inner work. I have a whole array of modalities that I'm constantly using to work on myself, to do my self-inquiry, to evacuate my traumas, to keep myself in check, to work my projections, to work with also the different escape hatches that can pop up on anything, whether that's working too much, staying on the computer too long, whether that's, eating a particular food item at 10 o'clock at night when I really don't need a food item at 10 o'clock at night. It's like, what is that? I'm no longer where I once was long, long ago in my teenage years, but there's a commitment to staying the course, to staying awake, to staying consciousness, to putting myself in circumstances on a regular basis to stay humble and keep myself in check. And so for me, with all the inspirations I have with teaching and more online courses that I'm inspired to teach, and the in-person work I've been doing all these years, it's all good as long as I'm also walking the talk.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, one last question. What is the message you would like to give to people on shifting tides?
Let me just think about that for a second. I'm inspired to share the different food correlations and the emotions. So let me just take you quickly through them. So this isn't, this is when we're acting out, or when we're maybe abusing that food item or eating too much of it. And through my own journey, I've learned that there's a correlation. There's often a telltale emotion that is linked to that particular food that we're acting out on. So for example, when we eat things like chips or crisps or nuts, chips in the American sense, crisps in the British sense, anything crunchy, often it's boredom or anger, something gnawing at us. And instead of processing it directly, we're going to the food to process it. When we go for any of the caffeinated beverages, whether that's chocolate, coffee, tea, fizzy drinks that have caffeine in them, it's that place where we want motivation. where we are either bored or we're not fulfilled in our work. For people, for example, that really need a lot of coffee to function, sometimes it's running away from painful feelings. Sometimes they're in a life activity that is causing them great boredom, and that's something. Next, the milky foods. So that could be the yogurt, the ice cream, lots of milk. These things are mother love. It's kind of an energetic, symbolic recreation of breast milk. And so it's wanting that love. Sugar, any of the sugar items is basically love, just the sweetness of life, wanting some sweetness, some love, some goodness in life. What else? The starchy, the pastas, the rice, the breads. So the naans, the chapatis, when we're like taking in a lot of that, the heavier food, usually it's indicating that there's a void. There's an emptiness, a loneliness, a deep loneliness that we're wanting to fill. An excessive dependency on fizzy drinks that isn't just the caffeine place is give me some pizzazz in my life. Give me some sparkle in my life because I'm having a hard time finding it another way. Now, I'm not going to get into the controversy on eating meat, not eating meat. Some people I know generally that's their path, and I respect that 100%. But what I have found is that when someone's excessively attached to high amounts of meat, what I have discovered is that it's usually a desire to numb down strong emotion or a certain kind of spiritual or mystical or psychic kind of awareness. That sensitivity is open and they want to bring it down. They want to dull it because it's just too threatening, too uncomfortable. And then, are there any other items that I want to say of the food territory? I think that's it. I think I've covered the main.
Alcohol.
Oh, alcohol. Yeah, alcohol, definitely numbing, to numb insecurities or feelings that are of unworthiness or traumas that are rising. And of course, nicotine. I mean, that's not a food item. But, see, the thing that's also very interesting with nicotine, I didn't know until a few years ago, is that when you have nicotine, it starts artificially giving you certain bursts of dopamine or serotonin, but particularly the dopamine. And it then calms your ability to secrete that naturally. And so what happens is you start becoming dependent on that. And so it's a place where there's, the dopamine is where we need motivation and we need to feel, and serotonin is more to like bring us into serenity. So when we're playing with our hormones with artificial means, it's a place where some trauma is coming in that's unmanageable. We haven't found a way to manage it. And so we're needing that extra support, that crutch to get through it. And so we're using a biochemical method. And so that's, I've used that word trauma a lot today, and it's definitely very relevant, how to heal that trauma. So I would say, so to bring more awareness, to just bring more awareness, or when we're eating too much. So it may not be just the food item, but we're eating too much of a good thing. And that again is filling the void or wanting to numb down. I would just say again, put down the food, feel the feelings, and get support to do so if you don't know how to do that.
That's a beautiful, beautiful information you've given. I think it would help so many people because today people because they have been for the last 1 year caged in the house. And so the need to fill their stomach and just binge is leading them to obesity, leading them to so many mental problems, depression, loneliness. It's leading to a lot of issues.
And I would also say, Mahima, one thing that is absolutely primordial is the need for a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
The need for a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
So it's ideal, from my perspective, it's ideal if we can have a morning spiritual practice. Sometimes that's not possible due to little children or work commitments, but some activity every day where we move the body, we circulate the life force energy, whatever that means is, And we go into some kind of alpha or theta state of consciousness where we really slow down the brain waves and we come in a certain stillness.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cyntha. This was such
Thank you,
a
Mahima.
wonderful conversation. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you for the work you do, my dear. Thank you for your enthusiasm and your endless devotion. And I met you at when I came back from that retreat from Brazil. And as I was just about to leave my marriage and just before I went raw, I literally met you weeks before I went raw. So you came in my life at a really pivotal spiritual upgrade in my life. And there's no accident that here we are all these years later.
What a journey, Cyntha, you had. What a journey. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you. On
Thank you,
that
my dear.
note,
Thanks so much,
so
Mahima.
much.
Thank you.
We are what we eat. And that holds so true of Cyntha's incredible journey. She used food as a catalyst of change every step of the way. So next time there's an interesting snack lying in front of you, think hard. So with that, we come to the end of today's episode. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on our YouTube channel. We'll be back with you with yet another beautiful story in our next episode. See you next week. Bye-bye.